flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You seated?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
All in favor?
Need a second?
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. To approval of minutes of May.
I make the motion to approve the minutes as presented.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Number 3, staff request TX 24.06.01. Staff requests a text amendment to Article 12 to amend the off-street parking requirements. And B, statement of consistency and reasonability.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mia Polchinski. I am the planning intern. This is my second summer interning with planning and zoning, and I'm also a student at UNC Charlotte in the master's program for urban planning. And today I was given the opportunity to present a proposed text amendment about the off-street parking requirements. So I'll go ahead and get started.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm proposing text amendment TX 24.06.01, and this includes 2 parts. The first part is that staff is requesting a text amendment in Ordinance Table 12.1 to amend the off-street parking requirements by, there's a couple parts, removing the minimum space requirement, adding the minimum bicycle space requirements to Table 12.1, and then simplifying the overall table and the land use categories just to make it easier to interpret and easier to measure also. And then the second part of the text amendment is that sections 12.3-4 and 12.3-5 should be reserved for the Code of Ordinances because they relate to the enforcement of the town's parking requirements rather than applying to future developments and redevelopments, which is the purpose of the ordinance. So I'll go into a little more detail about both parts. First, to talk about Table 12.1, as I said, we want to take away the minimum space requirement. And this is for a couple reasons. One of those being no surrounding municipalities have a minimum requirement, so we're the only one out of Matthews, Indian Trail, Waxhaw, Mint Hill. We're the only ones with the minimum space requirement. And it's very rare that developers wouldn't try to maximize parking anyways, so a minimum space requirement could encourage unnecessary spaces to be made when there's just no need for them. Second, we just want to condense the land use categories, make the table a little bit more simple, and we're changing it from 41 down to 16 categories, and they're just more general. And then finally, we want to incorporate the minimum bicycle space requirements into the table, and we're not creating these requirements, we're just moving them from a previous section of the article. Section 12.8, and we're just adding them into the table. So we're not changing anything about them except for their location in the ordinance. And then just to reiterate about Articles 12.3-4 and 12.3-5, we just want to reserve those for the Code of Ordinances rather than the Development Ordinance, just because they don't really apply to new developments and redevelopments. They're the enforcement of parking regulations. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'll talk a little bit about my research process for the table revision. First, I conducted municipality research with the municipalities that I mentioned, Matthews, Mint Hill, Waxhaw, and Indian Trail, and then created a summary table for each of those municipalities. This is the one for Matthews. Here's Mint Hill. This is Waxhaw, and this is Indian Trail. I won't go too deep into those, but that's just kind of the basis of my research. And then I compared all of those to our current off-street parking table, which, as you can see, it's pretty long, pretty detailed, and there's a lot of categories. So this is our current table. It's the continued current table. And this is the proposed revised table. And as you can see, it's a lot more simple, easier to read, and it's more consistent units, like it's square footage of the gross floor area of buildings for most of the categories. So it's just easier to calculate for users, like developers, residents, even staff. And yeah, there's less categories overall. So I'll just walk you through a quick example so you can kind of tell the difference between the two tables. So just imagine a resident of Stallings wants to open a hair salon in an existing building, and they want to ensure that the attached parking lot is in compliance with the ordinance and the off-street parking requirements. So if they were using the current table, they would have to find barber shops and salons specifically and try to look at the maximum requirement, and they would see the requirement is 1 space per 0.33 operator stations plus 1 space per 2 employees on a shift of greatest employment, which is a little bit confusing, a little bit hard to calculate, and it requires a lot of variables that might be unknown to them at that time. So if you look at the revised version of the table, you would just find the category office and service, and it would be under professional offices and services. And the calculation for the maximum space requirement is just 5 per 1,000 square feet of the gross floor area of the building. So all you have to know is the gross floor area of the building to be able to calculate the maximum amount of spaces you can have. And then if you look to the right here, you'll just find the bicycle minimums, like right in plain sight. You don't have to go searching through the ordinance. So those are the differences between the two tables. And yeah, to sum it up, staff acknowledges the need to reformat Table 12.1 into a more clear and condensed layout that's a lot more easily interpreted by the users. And it will maximize everyone's understanding of the parking requirements. And additionally, staff recommends that sections 12.3-4 and 12.3-5 become reserved sections, and this is because they apply to the Code of Ordinances rather than the Development Ordinance. And also, to just touch on the Comprehensive Land Use Plan, it is consistent, the proposed changes, with the Comprehensive Land Use Plan because this plan mentions the goals of reducing parking minimums and the goals of addressing appropriate quantities and qualities of off-street parking throughout the town. And now it's time for questions. So what questions do you have?
Roy, what is the reason for having a maximum number of parking spaces for a particular site?
So we want to limit this just because it makes sense. We don't want to have a business with like a giant unnecessary parking lot with like a ton of spaces we just want to limit like the amount of impervious surfaces for many reasons, and yeah, and it already exists also. Yeah.
Does this change I mean, I'm looking at the residential off-street parking,
Yes.
and it's the max of 3 per unit. Is that a new number, or is that already what's currently established? Like,
Yeah, so I'll go back to the current one. Residential stays pretty much the same between the two of them. So I believe, let's see.
maximum from the top, oh.
So multifamily is 3 per unit. Single family, yeah, it's just not applicable. But if you look at the other municipalities, pretty much all of them are a maximum of 3. And some of them are 2 with 1 guest parking spot. So I tried to just like average all those together, and that's how I came up with 3.
My only concern, and this is just based on, I lived in Monroe before I moved out here down Sun Valley area, and I lived in, I don't know the name of the subdivision at this point, but parking there was atrocious. There was literally 1 spot for a household, so I'm just kind of concerned if we like take away, you know, a minimum of 2, whatever it may be, for a single family house. Like, I live in a 4-bedroom house, so it's like, if we only have 2 spots, you know, I got 3 people in this house that drives, and it's 3 cars right from the bat, so.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, yeah.
We limit that to like a minimum of whatever it is. I mean, I guess a max of 3. So, you know, if they're not gonna be willing to put in the full max to take up space, I guess. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I hear what you're saying. The maximum is not, it's not required to meet the maximum, that's just,
That's the concern. If it's not required to
Yeah.
meet the maximum, and the maximum is only 3,
mhm.
they may not be pushing for more than 1 spot. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
I'm not wording that like it's in my head, and I know it's confusing, so.
Okay, yeah.
Apologize for that.
No, I understand what you're saying. You're concerned that there's not gonna be
Yeah,
enough
there's not enough
parking.
parking spaces.
Yeah, if there's no minimum. Yeah,
They're gonna try to squeeze in as much as they can on the property and not put as much spots in, and then there's no street parking. Gotta park at the community, you know, like for us, we had to park at our community pool area, which was not really walking distance. You know, had visitors or whatever it was. That'd be my only concern with that.
well, yeah.
Would you
I
like to
know,
answer?
I know what you're gonna say, but,
I would just say, yeah, just,
Minimums for residential.
so,
yeah, you can say it.
I hear you, and that's a valid point. So you could ask for approval of this text amendment and then suggest a revision to the minimum categories and ask that we keep the minimum categories for either just residential or all the categories. Is that what you're gonna say?
Yeah, I would just say just to make a recommendation that staff look into presenting better, more consistent calculations for residential. Like I know it says not applicable on our current one. Maybe we could do something similar to that. Because I see what you're saying. I think most of our concerns are for the parking for commercial development.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like for marketability, if someone's proposing a residential development and there's nowhere for the residents to park, they're shooting themselves in the foot. So, I mean, it seems like they have a built-in motivation to meet some sort of minimum. But, like,
Yeah, and I just don't, I don't know how you would classify that. I mean, it's going off square footage, then, you know, what do you say, like 3 per, you know, I don't,
Typically for residential, it's just per unit.
yeah. That's
It's
what
a
that's
li-
what I'm
yeah,
saying.
it's
Like,
a little
so
hard to
what do you
calculate
set
the square
that
footage.
minimum at for any house, because the houses around here can go anywhere from 1,200 to, you know, 2,800 square foot on average.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you set that minimum number at for the residential side?
I would say a minimum of 2 per unit.
So, but none of the surrounding communities have any kind of minimums, even for residential. That's what you're saying.
Not the ones that I looked into.
That makes sense, because I'm saying the one max, and
Yeah.
if it was a big SUV or truck, where was you fit in
Yeah.
that? You were taking up sidewalk space.
Yeah,
Trying to keep anything within
I mean,
property
I
lines.
agree
I'm
with
not.
that. I mean, cause like, been over to visit people at like Lake Park, and if all the residents are there, there's nowhere to park without walking, you know, a long way to get to somebody.
Or
So,
shuttling back and forth from a
Yeah.
community parking area, which is a pain.
so I'd be in favor of retaining some sort of
What is-
minimums in residential.
What's an accessory dwelling unit in the residential side? What is that?
So I think it would qualify as any kind of accessory structure attached to like a residential area, like a freestanding shed or garage,
That wouldn't be a dwelling unit, would it? Or like
a
a
guest
full
house, any kind of like freestanding structure.
Be something that does have a bedroom then, or something that is designed for occupancy.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinance allows those.
So I'm just looking at like, just say there's a house that has a pool house. And then the dwelling with 3 bedrooms has no maximum. And then the dwelling, the accessory does have a maximum, so how does that, do those not conflict with each other?
Okay, so this would be the revised table.
Okay.
The one that was pulled up was the current table that we have now. So this is the proposed table.
That takes out the minimum and just has a maximum one.
Yes.
So that's a whole problem in itself too, then. If there's no minimum to it, then they could technically not put any and
So
be
now
fine, right?
Okay, so now we're putting in the new table, would that be putting a maximum on a single-family house?
Yes.
So I could, okay. Like my driveway, I can fit 4 cars in it, so I wouldn't be even allowed to have that at my house, no matter how many bedrooms it has. So if you had 4 drivers in a house, somebody doesn't get to park their car. I don't think I could support that. Yeah.
I would say that's, all the surrounding municipalities have this exact maximum. So I would say, I know you are maybe wary, but the town goals for the comprehensive land use plan is to reduce the amount of parking spaces that all developments have, including residential. Because we're trying to decrease impervious surface, increase open space and things like that. So I understand that your current driveway it's grandfathered in, so the new developments would have to follow that. But if you are nervous about parking maximums for residential, I would say either recommend that change to minimum. Maybe we could have just a minimum for residential, because they're not gonna put 50 spaces for a residential house, you know? So I would say we could change that to a minimum, or we can add a minimum and a maximum that, we can go back to the drawing board and present something that, to council that, has further research.
Yeah, I think,
definitely
I think we can't go away from the single-family household where you don't consider the number of bedrooms in the house.
I don't know if we can consider the bedrooms, because we don't look at sizes of the houses, and we're not allowed to.
There should still be a flat minimum, because just because they don't have it, and again, for like Monroe, doesn't mean they shouldn't have, you know. Speaking from personal experience on that one, just because they didn't have it, they should have, they didn't, and they got away with it, and they packed houses right on top of each other, and, you know, if you had a truck that was massive, you were literally blocking a public sidewalk. which could also be a finable offense if somebody was really wanting to beat you down with it. And then you get HOAs that want to come in and give you fines for everything under the sun because you're parked halfway on the street. Well, I can't fit in my driveway. Then you're also, seems like we're trying to get rid of people having vehicles in still a semi-rural area where commutes are 35 plus minutes in any direction.
Yeah, I mean,
For work.
it's like if somebody had acreage and they have multiple cars and a camper and a boat, you know, and we're saying they can only have 3 parking spots on that whole property?
Doesn't prevent a driveway, just parking.
Okay, so a driveway, so your driveway can be as big as you want and you can park, okay.
It's separately.
So
Yeah,
this,
it's
this,
separate.
so what's the difference between a parking spot and a driveway then?
So driveway is just the access to
Yeah,
your like parking or a garage. So let's say you have a driveway and then you can have a large area that has parking spaces. You could have up to, let's say, our driveway limits 200 feet in our ordinance. And it leads to a area that has, let's say it's a single family detached. It has an area that can fit 3 vehicles plus whatever garage they have.
I don't see a developer seeing it that way.
So,
It just doesn't, it seems vague enough that they could get away with like, oh, I'm gonna use the maximum amount of land space that I have available to me.
so it just depends on what kind of development they're gonna build. So we do have.
Yeah, I get
We do
the,
have, things in our ordinance to prevent things that you're thinking about. So for example, like conditional zonings for townhomes, multifamily developments. We don't require conditional zonings for single family in certain zoning categories. And I don't see someone not putting any parking in a single family, residential development. I would say that could be a loophole, worst case scenario, yes. But you could think, I don't see any development in the surrounding areas that don't have any parking. Like in Indian Trail, Matthews, or Waxhaw.
and I haven't driven through, but even the townhomes up here, they're very limited on parking too. I mean, I know they have a garage, but the new ones, the Ryan Home
Oh,
place
the
up
Bailey
here.
Mills, yeah, that one was built per a development agreement.
Yeah.
So they could ignore any of the parking regulations anyways.
But that's a, general concern that, there'd be another one. I mean, that whole road's for,
So I think what your concern may be, we could just change that word maximum to minimum. And I think that would maybe solve things. Or we could add another category in residential, just say maximum, minimum.
I think that'd be a safer bet. Have a 2-column kind of thing.
Is that something you want for commercial as well, planning board? No other municipality has that.
commercial is gonna kind of take care of itself, I would think, but.
Especially if they're a customer facing
Yeah,
thing, they're
yeah.
not taking that into account when they're developing, like, hey, we're gonna need, X amount of property space for partly, I mean, I would think. Based off what's there now is what, 3, well, again, it's still a maximum, so that's, Yeah, I think there should be a minimum and a maximum column for sure. I couldn't say, I mean, I would say residential wise, I would say like 2 per unit for the minimum. I think that would be my suggestion. You don't want to break it down too much more than that. It's like, multifamily could be, 1 per, but
So just residential or all the categories?
I would say minimum max for all. I wouldn't know what to say for the actual numbers on the commercial side. Like, I don't know what that would, 1 per 1,000 square feet. I don't know that. That's the part I don't know enough about that to know. I just know residential. I think there should be a minimum max for sure. Starting at like 2.
So I would say for a recommendation, you can either approve with those recommendations or deny based on the recommendations are not up to a minimum and maximum standards that you would like. I would say I wouldn't piecemeal every last category.
No.
I would just go with a recommendation on either approving or denying to council, based on you wanting a minimum. And then you can vote on it, and each person can either approve or if it passes with a denial or approval, then it would go to council that way. Or if it's null, then the next person can make a recommendation.
So approval or denial goes to town council next, then they make final, okay.
Yeah, we'll still amend it and bring planning board's recommendations to council regardless of whatever you guys choose.
Well, I like the simplified calculations and I like the fewer categories. I agree that in the residential, there should be some sort of minimum. But we wouldn't have to like propose specifics. We would just say
We would do that
we were
for you.
charging staff to, you know,
And that would be based off our last category, our current one, and then also we'll kind of take into account all the other municipalities as well.
Rest of it, you guys are concerned with?
No, I think the only issues that we're talking about is the residential areas. Commercial looks good. I think the minimum is better than
Yeah,
the maximum.
add the minimum for sure.
That way you're gonna be able to control the number of spaces. Just have a minimum amount. Taking into consideration the different types of residential property we have, you know, some you can't do anything, you can only fit two, you know. Others have a bigger, longer driveway and all kinds of different situations. So I think a minimum, best way to go.
I make a motion to approve the proposed changes with the addition of adding the minimum column and having the maximum in there, and leaving it up to staff to make the discrepancies on the minimum and maximum.
Maximum?
I would say have minimum max, for sure. Just add that column of minimum to it.
Okay. Second? Second. All in favor?
need to state that it's consistent and
Yeah. What is it,
So this is the statement of consistency and reasonableness. I'll just go through this real quick.
well, I move that we find that this is consistent and reasonable as presented.
a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
And this is the memo. Okay.
Read it all. Next item on the agenda is number 4, adjournment. I have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion
Second?
to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.